I'm Brandi Kruse. Welcome to Undivided. Happiest of Fridays to all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback, and a special welcome to Undivided subscribers. If you have not become a subscriber already, you can do so in two ways. Patreon.com/undivided. That's patreon.com/undivided, or by becoming a contributor on my locals community, brandikruse.locals.com. Thank you to the founding sponsor of Undivided, 1530 Mortgage. Pay them a visit at 1530mortgage.com. A few things I want to get to today. Do you know what a push poll is? So a push poll is designed to really just influence your opinion of maybe a particular politician or a political party, more so than it's designed to actually gather information. Well, there is a doozy of a push poll going around in Washington state. In fact, I got it. I didn't even realize it. I had ignored the text about it. And then I had a few people email me and I was like, well, yeah, that sounds familiar. And I was like, I did get it. And so I've taken this push poll survey. I want to clue you in on it and talk about just the egregious questions that were asked in it. Plus, we're going to talk more on what the White House knows or perhaps does not know about the student debt forgiveness plan and how much it's going to cost everyday Americans. And on that subject, Spike Cohen, who is the 2020 vice presidential nominee on the Libertarian ticket, he's going to join us for Fridays with Friends to talk about how his party would solve the student debt crisis. So we're going to talk today about possible solutions. And also on Florida Report, our weekly segment with my sister in Miami. Is Ron DeSantis getting a little bit too petty with his political opponents? We'll have that conversation. But first, just really quickly, are we really getting as weak as a society as I think we are? There was this, I just saw this before we started taping, and I'm like, this just sums up so much of what's wrong with our country right now. So there is this group called Podcast Movement. They bill themselves as the world's largest community of podcasters. And they had a conference, a convention of sorts in Dallas that started on August 23rd. And I believe it wraps up today. Well, they have different booths at the convention, apparently, for different podcasters. And the Daily Wire had a booth at the Podcast Movement convention. This is, I shit you not, a tweet that this group sent out yesterday. Hi, folks. We owe you an apology before sessions kick off for the day. Yesterday afternoon, Ben Shapiro briefly visited the PM22 Expo area near the Daily Wire booth. Though he was not registered or expected, we take full responsibility for the harm done by his presence. They went on to write, there's no way around it. We agreed to sell the Daily Wire a first-time booth based on the company's large presence in podcasting. The weight of that decision is now painfully clear. Shapiro is a co-founder. A drop-in, however unlikely, should have been considered a possibility. The presence of Ben Shapiro at your expo did harm to people? Ben Shapiro apparently showed up to take pictures with fans, and presumably there were a lot of people there who were excited about that and wanted to see him. I imagine some people were not so excited and triggered by his presence. So now the podcast movement, which again bills itself as the world's largest community of podcasters, if that's true, I imagine that you also are, there's a bunch of different types of podcasts, a wide array of podcasters, a wide array of subjects that podcasts are about, yet you think that you have to apologize for the presence of Ben Shapiro, one of the largest podcasters in the world, because it did harm? What was this? The weight of the decision to allow a Daily Wire booth is now painfully clear. This is absurd. I don't know. I'm not part of this podcast movement group, and now I for sure never will be. But this is just so indicative of where we're at as a society, where we are that triggered by the mere presence of someone who we disagree with politically. And you can't just say, oh, well, I don't like Ben Shapiro, so I'm not going to go over to the area where he's at this expo, because that's what an adult would do. That's what a real world adult would do. Would be like, yeah, I don't like Ben Shapiro. I'm just not going to go see him. But what his presence in the building is triggering you, that's just so stupid. Oh gosh. Anyway, so note to self, never join the podcast movement group because they are easily triggered. Let's talk about push polls because you're going to get those throughout your voting lifetime and certainly leading up to an important election. I'll just give you the Wikipedia definition of push poll. It says a push poll is an interactive marketing technique most commonly employed during political campaigning, in which an individual organization attempts to manipulate or alter prospective voters' views under the guise of conducting an opinion poll. So basically, they're trying to gaslight you, right? They're trying to manipulate your thoughts or your feelings towards a political candidate or perhaps an entire political party. Well, there is an opinion poll, an opinion survey more so, that's going around. It's being pushed out. People have gotten calls and via text. I got it via text, and I just kind of had disregarded it. As just something like spam text. But then I had a couple people email me about this particular poll and some of the questions and how the questions were phrased. And I just thought, oh my gosh, even for a push poll, this is absolutely egregious. So there were a few, normal questions like, do you consider yourself a Democrat, Republican? How likely are you to vote in November? Are you a registered voter in Washington state? It started off with some really basic stuff. But then the intent of the push poll became very clear because we had gone through a few things where it was asking about who are you more likely to vote for if the election were held today? Again, very normal stuff. And then I hit this one. Most Republican candidates in Washington state hold the following views. Which do you find most concerning? And it lists some views that it claims most Republican candidates in Washington state have. So one of the options is oppose gay marriage, eliminate abortion rights. So first of all, do I believe that, this one, eliminate gun safety laws? Now, do I believe that there are certainly Republican candidates who don't support gay marriage, who want to restrict abortion, who don't want to go as far as Democrats on some gun control legislation? Yes. But this is completely pulled out of their that most Republican candidates oppose gay marriage, want to eliminate abortion rights, want to eliminate gun safety laws. That's just ridiculous. And so now I'm starting to realize, like, okay, this has definitely got an agenda, right? And then it goes through what it says. Now you will read some statements opponents might use to describe Washington state Republican officials and candidates. Please indicate if each makes you more or less likely to vote for a Republican candidate for the Washington state legislature. So again, it's framing this as now you'll read some statements opponents might use to describe Republican candidates. So here's a statement that it gives you. Republicans in Washington state are just like Trump supporters elsewhere around the country. In 2020, the Republican candidate for governor here in Washington sued our Secretary of State, alleging fraud despite what a judge described as no evidence. Okay, so yeah, Lauren Culp, the 2020 gubernatorial candidate in Washington state, made unfounded claims about the election. But I love this. Republicans in Washington state are just like Trump supporters elsewhere around the country. It just is ridiculous. Clearly designed to push an agenda. But here's the one that really got me. And this is the one a couple people sent me that really was like, oh, what is this? This is about halfway through the survey. It was a very long survey, by the way. Get this. It says the question, which of the following words best describes how you would characterize the agenda of Washington state Republicans? Okay, so it gives you a list of words to choose from. Here are the only options on this list: dangerous, radical, Trump Republicans, extreme, risky, MAGA Republicans, or out of touch. And then it gives you a little box where you can say something else. So these are the only, I don't know if this is any indication of what Democrats think of all Republicans. These are the only options given to you to characterize the agenda of Washington state Republicans: dangerous, radical, Trump Republicans, extreme, risky, MAGA Republicans, out of touch. So anyway, I reached out to the group that is behind this particular survey, and they do surveys like this certainly nationally. The group is called Dynata, Dynata. And I reached out to them this morning just saying, hey, you guys are currently running a survey of voters here in Washington state by text and phone. And I asked, can you tell me any information about it, like who paid for it or what voters it's targeting? I haven't heard back from them yet. I don't think they're required to tell me who the survey was funded by or what the aim of it is. But it's just a good example. I kind of want, if you got this text and didn't respond to it, again, I got this a few days ago from this Dynata Research Corporation. If you got it and haven't responded, I think you should just screw with them. I mean, it's obviously a push-pull. It's not designed to collect any actual usable information. So just go on there and screw with them and give them stupid answers and answers that don't make sense and just totally manipulate whatever data they might get out of it. It took me like 5 minutes and I screwed with them in my answers. So beware of push-pulls because they're out there. And if you're not hip to it or wise to it, you might take one of those and allow some of that bias information to get into your brain. But this one was just particularly egregious, almost to the point where it was laughable. The war of words continues today on President Joe Biden's plan to cancel thousands of dollars per borrower in student debt. Some people will see $10,000 in loan forgiveness. Others will see $20,000 in loan forgiveness. There continues to be kind of two really strong camps here. The one camp that thinks this is unfair, this is irresponsible, this is absurd. And then the other camp that thinks, well, we should, just because somebody else had to pay student loans doesn't mean that everyone else should suffer. And that camp doesn't believe that this has an impact on other people. And I've seen some really disingenuous arguments. As I've stated in the last two podcasts, I believe, as I think most Americans do, that our higher education system is broken in a lot of ways. Politics has seeped into it, but it's certainly broken when it comes to how expensive it is. We all agree on that. We just disagree on how to go about fixing it. And for Democrats, they think that just canceling student debt is the answer. And there were a couple things. I was actually proud of the White House press corps because Karine Jean-Pierre gets up for her White House press briefing and she's asked about the cost, because there is a cost associated with billions of dollars that the government has paid out that's not going to return to the Treasury. So she's asked about the cost associated with the president's plan, and true to form, she has no idea what she's talking about.
Again, here's what we have done. Here's
a lot about how much it might cost, it might not cost. Who is paying for this?
What we are saying is the work that this administration has done, the work that the Democrats in Congress has done, is actually there, and you see that the 1.7 trillion deficit deduction that you see is going to benefit us in being able to do something for the middle class, to do something for the middle class. This is about doing something for people who make less than $125,000.
I've said a couple of times that this is a fiscally responsible way of doing this. But can you explain a little bit about how you guys think it is fiscally responsible? Because you can't say how much it's going to cost. You can't say exactly how it's going to be paid for. And you can't say exactly who is paying for the cost. I get how you're arguing that it helps certain populations, but how is it fiscally responsible?
I mean, the way that we are talking about it and what we're trying to say is the actions that we have taken, and you see this with the way that the deficit has been reduced. We have taken just the last 19 months. And I see that look that you're giving me there.
I hear the argument that you have taken previous fiscally responsible actions that give you more wiggle room to be.
Right, it gives us no. We see this. We do not see this as irresponsible.
Well, we give Susan Rice, the director of domestic policy, a chance to actually answer the question. See if she does any better.
$100 billion.
We'll see when they take up the opportunity. We'll be able to give you a much better sense of that.
ballpark at this point?
I think it depends on the numbers. Like, unfortunately, and we're here to encourage as many people to take it up as possible. If 43 million borrowers take it up, that'll be different than if 50% of those 43 million take it up.
If it is 43 million, if I could just follow on, if the full number of eligible borrowers do take advantage of the program, what would the cost be?
I can't give you that off the top of my head.
If you're going to announce a major policy like this, and then you're going to send your White House press secretary to answer questions, don't you think she should be prepared for the most obvious question, which is how much this is going to cost? It's like the administration is just not functioning. It is truly non-functioning. And I also, one other thing before we get to the cost estimates associated with this, Nancy Pelosi, you might recall, back when there was this big pressure from progressives to do student debt cancellation, Nancy Pelosi was like, look, the president doesn't have that power. The power of the purse belongs in Congress.
People think that the president of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress.
Well, now, of course, fast forward a little bit, and now that the president has done this and that we're in a midterm election year and they're trying to buy votes, Nancy Pelosi was like, oh, yeah, of course the president has the power to do this.
We didn't know what authority the president had to do this, and now clearly it seems he has the authority to do this.
You mean to tell me, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, a woman who has been in Congress since 1987, that she truly just found out that it's okay for the president to do something like this? No, she's just changing her tune because she thinks that this will be popular. And to me, that should bother everyone. That should bother every voter when you're that disingenuous and when you're gaslighting the public. I would feel better if people who support student debt cancellation just came out and said, look, yeah, we do think other people should have to pay to help folks pay down their student debt. We just think that is a good thing to do for people. And we understand that it's going to cost individuals money. I would be more accepting of that than I am of people like Nancy Pelosi suddenly saying, oh, the president has the power to do this, or more accepting than people online who are saying, oh, well, why do you want other people to suffer? This isn't going to have an impact on anyone else. That's ridiculous. So there have been now some independent analyses done of, the actual cost of this. The University of Pennsylvania Penn Wharton budget model, which is a nonpartisan model that looks at the budgetary impacts of things that the White House does. So they estimate that it's going to cost the student debt cancellation portion of this alone could cost as much as $519 billion over a 10-year budget window. And then you look at the loan forbearance for 2022, which is going to continue through the end of the year, and that's going to cost an additional $16 billion. And there's some other additional costs associated with what the president ruled out. But they essentially said, yeah, I mean, this is, it's money not coming back to the Treasury, so there is a cost associated with this. And so how is the government going to make up for that? Well, there have been some analyses also done on what the average tax increase for Americans is going to be as a result of this. The National Taxpayers Union says that the average burden for each U.S. taxpayer will be $2,503. It'll be less for low-income people, higher for high-income people, but that's the average. And they said that that's the best guess they can give to date. For instance, there hadn't been this anticipation that the president would give more money to people who received Pell Grants, so low-income grants to be able to go to college. And so that cost per taxpayer might actually be higher. One of the things that we need to understand is, the president talks about helping the middle class, for example. The middle class is the group of taxpayers that can least afford to see a rise in their taxes. Low-income Americans, the lowest income Americans, they don't pay federal income tax because they're below that threshold. And then if you're a really high earner, $400,000, $500,000 a year, a few $1,000s in additional taxes, is it fair? No. But can you stomach it? Yes. It is the middle class that can least afford, that has the least sort of wiggle room when it comes to taxes, that's going to be impacted the most by this. And anyone who claims otherwise is simply lying. They're simply trying to gaslight voters. And when you hear, again, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre's answer to a very simple question about costs, it shows either they have no idea what they're talking about, or they don't want Americans to focus on the cost of this. They simply want you to focus on the positives. Now, I think it's fair to say that both Republicans and Democrats are to blame for the state of higher education. They both had opportunities to be in control in Congress, to have the White House, and we've known for a very long time the ballooning costs of higher education, and none of them have done anything meaningful to address the root cause of the issue. And no, student debt cancellation does not address the root cause of the issue. So we thought, well, why don't we reach out to our friend Spike Cohen, who we've had on the podcast before. Spike Cohen, of course, was the 2020 vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party. We thought, well, gosh, if Democrats and Republicans can't come up with anything meaningful, well, perhaps Libertarians have a good idea. So Spike Cohen was nice enough to join us today for Fridays with Friends. Spike Cohen joins us on the phone. Welcome back to Undivided.
Thank you, Brandi. It's great to be on again.
So I was saying earlier in the podcast, Democrats, I don't believe that debt cancellation is a solution. But, in fairness, Republicans have had control in Congress and knew that the cost of higher ed was a problem and didn't fix it either. So what would Libertarians propose that we do about the current debt load that borrowers are carrying right now in this country?
Right. Well, first of all, we need to look at what got us here. And it's pretty easy to see. Starting in the 1970s, with the government introducing things like Pell Grants and backing of private student loans, you started seeing this massive increase in the tuitions, the price of the tuitions, and a massive increase in the loans that were being given out as a result of that. And the answer for that is very simple. Prior to the government backing those loans, the lenders had to actually make it make financial sense for the loans that they were giving out, which means that they weren't going to give unlimited money to the universities, which means that the universities could only charge what they feel like the students and the lenders were willing to pay to attend the university. Once the government got involved and they gave their backing to it, you started seeing this big increase. Shortly after that, some senators, including Joe Biden, pushed for changes so that borrowers for student debt could not have the debt discharged in court if they weren't able to pay it. That caused an even greater increase because now the lenders knew that the students couldn't get away from the loan, even if they dropped out, even if they couldn't pay it. Then in 2010, with for some reason in the Obamacare bill, they basically nationalized the student loan system, and that's when it just spiraled completely out of control. So now that we know how we got here, how do we get out of it? Well, with the exact opposite. We need to get government out of student debt. We need to get government out of backing these loans and providing these loans, and that will bring back the price equilibrium of universities only charging what they can actually get from the students and the lenders, and lenders only giving the loans that they know they'll be able to reasonably be able to get back their money, their investment in that loan.
So let's talk about a couple of those things piecemeal. Taking the government out of the business of it, the government's not backing it. Won't it lead to higher interest rates and less funds available to borrowers?
No, it should actually do the exact opposite. Less funds available. I imagine there will be fewer loans given out for useless degrees that aren't going to make any money. But that's good. That's called malinvestment. When you have lenders that are giving out money for bad loans to people who shouldn't be able to qualify for university degrees that aren't going to be able to reasonably pay back those loans, that's an investment that shouldn't be made. It's similar to the bad mortgages causing the housing crisis. Bad loans help contribute to the student debt crisis. So that won't be happening. But for those who actually can demonstrate that they're able to pay it back with the type of degree that they're getting, lenders will have to be a lot smarter with the types of loans they're giving out. And that means that they're going to have to be a lot more reasonable. It also is going to bring bring in more competition, because right now it's just for the government doing it. Less than 4% of loans are coming from private companies. Well, if you only have a monopoly providing the loans, they can charge whatever they want to. So it'll actually be probably lower rates, or certainly not as high as they are now, and possibly more money available, but money available to loans that should be given out, and little to no money being given out to loans that should have never happened. Another major component for this is we need to roll back the policies that Biden and other people in Congress put in place in the 70s to allow borrowers to discharge their student debt if they can't afford to pay it, the same way that they could discharge any other debt. That has been a huge distortion in the market. Not allowing them to be able to discharge it has allowed the lenders to be absolutely predatory in the kinds of loans that they're giving out to 18 and 19-year-olds.
And that makes sense because, like you said, if the government's backing up the loan, then they know that, hey, we can charge just exorbitant amounts to give, for people to go to college. But, kind of on the flip side of that, if you allow then student loans to be able to be discharged in bankruptcy, I mean, I'm just devil's advocate. It seems like there's people who would abuse that. I know there are consequences to bankruptcy, but if they're looking at a big student loan debt and they're already in financial trouble, for instance. So I guess what would the benefit of that be, practically speaking?
The benefit would be, first of all, deterrent. A lender who knows that if they give out a bad loan to someone that they shouldn't have given a loan out to, that they might not even get any of their principal back, much less any interest, they're far less likely to give that loan out. Now they're going to do their own underwriting instead of letting the government do it, or instead of not even bothering to underwrite and just giving out loans to any warm body that asks for one. So that's a big effect there. Now, in terms of abuse, the reality, Brandi, is any system has potential for abuse, right? Any time that you introduce a way of doing things, there are going to be people that are going to try to find ways around it. We see that in bankruptcy when it comes to any other types of loans. We see that in the foreclosure system with mortgages. There's always abuse, but at no point does anyone call for not allowing people who desperately aren't able to pay these things to not be able to discharge those loans or have those loans discharged. And ultimately, that's up to the courts to decide. It is up to the courts to determine if the person in front of them truly is not able to pay this back reasonably, then they either reduce or eliminate the various loans that they've taken up. It's not an ideal system, but none of these are going to be perfect systems. But there's going to be far less abuse than the current abuse that's being done by multi-billion-dollar university systems and the federal government against teenagers. This is predation against teenagers after decades or years of propagandizing to them that the only way that they can do well is to go to a 4-year or 8-year college, and then hitting them with these ridiculous loans that they're just making these decisions on before they're even legally allowed to smoke a cigarette or own a firearm. They're being told that they can take out a 5 or 6 figure loan. That's the abuse that's happening right now.
Yeah, hard to disagree with that. One of the concerns also I have with this, and you talk about, lenders have to be a little more careful about who they would borrow to under this. For instance, you can't have some liberal arts student who just pisses away, a loan that they got in education and they can't pay it back. But I guess, would colleges have to make different degrees cost different amounts of money? Because there are some jobs where you do need to go to a 4-year university, but you're not going to make as much as a doctor or an attorney. And so I guess, how would you deal with that if you have a company that says, well, I don't know if they're going to be able to pay this back because, a teaching degree or whatever doesn't pay very much?
That's exactly what's going to happen, and that will be a good thing. For the degrees that either aren't as useful or are for careers that don't pay as well, the universities are going to have to be much more realistic with what they're charging for it in the first place. And that's a good thing. We want, and what that does is, we know from price signaling, when the price of something goes down, then the likelihood of people having demand for it goes up. So you may have a situation where, a current field, say social work or teaching or something like that, doesn't pay very well right now. And so as a result, the universities, because they're not getting government-backed loans anymore, are having to reduce the cost of those tuitions, which leads more people to say, hey, you know what, cost-benefit analysis, it costs me less to go to school to become a teacher. Maybe that would be a better, field for me to go into than, say, some other field. that actually makes those jobs more desirable for people to go into, because now it's actually something that they can affordably and reasonably get into. So yeah, there will probably be some of that where there's a lot more decision making on what for example, an arts degree or a teaching degree is what they're charging for that, and that's a good thing. That's good for the students. It's good for the overall market.
What do you think the argument is against for the two major parties to say, well, no, we're not going to overhaul the system in that way? What do you think is the biggest argument they'd have for you, Spike?
I think their arguments are largely going to be emotional in nature. They're going to say things like, what about the kids? Or they're going to say, I think the one that they would make that would even be worth responding to would be, well, what about poor students? And my answer would be, poor students right now are being put in a situation where they either have to pay off mortgage-sized student loans or they end up in a system where this so-called forgiveness plan, which has incentivized more predatory lending and even more tuition increases in the future, is going to make the problem even worse for them in the future. So I would turn it back around them. What about the poor students that Republicans and Democrats have put in this situation with decades of bad economic and educational policy that led to this to happen? And the answer is the best way to deal with it is to implement things that cause the price to go down as a result of market reflection of the reality of being held accountable for the financial choices that these lenders and these universities have been charging. It would disproportionately, in the same way that the policies that are currently in place have been disproportionately hurting poor students, therefore reversing those policies would disproportionately help those students.
Let's say that what you're talking about is a massive overhaul of the way that our education system currently works and the funding and loans. Just with where we're at right now, the hole that we've already dug ourselves in as a country, would libertarians support any sort of efforts to reduce or eliminate the current debt load?
I can tell you one thing I would support, which is ending the entire federal student loan system, including any debt that's been accrued to it. And that's not a official libertarian policy. I think there are a lot of libertarians that would agree with me, but I say if we're going to end it, let's end it. Not just ending the debt that's being held against poor students by the federal government, but ending the system that even did it in the first place. I don't think you can pair you can choose one or the other. I think if you're ending the debt or even reducing the debt that's being held to keep the system that created that massive debt monster in place is downright suicidal when it comes to trying to fix this policy. So I think one thing that could happen is you could simply have the federal government fold on this thing and default on itself and no longer hold that debt anymore for any of the students that have already been out of school and everything, no longer even have that system in place. And what you would see as a result of that is an absolute crash in tuition prices and in the loans that the loan amounts that the lenders would have to charge in the first place. It would be a massive deflationary move on the price of tuitions, which would be absolutely great for students.
Would it lead to a decline in the quality of education, though?
I'm not sure why that would be a concern. I guess I'd have to ask why that would even be a question.
Well, let's say, for instance, my undergrad, it was like $40,000 a year, and I'm sure a lot of that was just inflated over time. But if they're like, well, gosh, we can only reasonably charge let's say 10 grand a year for this student, are they going to take things away that are currently a benefit to that student?
I think what would happen more likely than that would be a trimming of the fat. We see the government is great at government and cronies, rent-seeking cronies that make a fortune off of bad government policy. They don't increase value. They increase their profits and their endowments. You have Harvard University, which has a $42 billion endowment. That's larger than the entire GDP of Afghanistan. You have Yale, which has a $31 billion endowment. Is that to the benefit of the students? I wouldn't say so. I think it's a benefit to the people running that nonprofit system because they can't profit off of it. So they just leave the endowment there and spend what they can. I don't think that having companies have to innovate to be able to retain their client base or their customer base, in this case, the universities, historically, when businesses have to innovate for cost efficiency purposes, it leads to better results and better quality for the consumers, in this case, the students, because when they're becoming cost efficient, they're also becoming value efficient. The alternative to that is what we have right now, where they're getting giant lump sums of money, and it doesn't matter what they're providing because they basically created a closed market for themselves where they can charge whatever they want to. So yeah, there'll be less money that they're getting, but they'll also have to provide more value because there will be more upward pressure on them to actually provide value for what they're giving in exchange.
Well, Spike Cohen, I think that's there's some interesting concepts in there. Certainly, I think the country's a long way from adopting that kind of approach to it. But
I didn't say this was going to happen tomorrow. No, absolutely not.
But I think it's something for people to think about. Like I said, the other two parties haven't done squat over the years, and they've made the problem worse. I wanted to end on a totally unrelated thing that I saw this morning, and I was like, oh, well, I'm talking to Spike today, and I should ask him about this. Are you familiar with this tweet the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire sent out that's got everybody in a tizzy?
I have not seen it, but I've had it described to me. I've been campaigning all day for some local candidates in Indiana, so I haven't really been on my phone much.
Meghan McCain crying over the casket of her father. Yesterday was the anniversary of his death, and they sent out a tweet that said, "Happy holidays." And they have since kind of reiterated that he is a warmonger responsible for the deaths of people across the world. What do you say about that tweet?
Yeah, you will have a harder time finding a stronger opponent or critic of what I would agree is the warmongering of John McCain and the legacy that he has left behind of warmongering. I see absolutely no reason to mock his daughter at a time that she was, if it's the picture I think it is, crying over his casket on the day of his funeral. I don't see what message that provides. I don't see how, I have no idea what was supposed to be done with that. And I certainly don't think that a Libertarian Party local, state, or national affiliate should be putting that kind of thing out there. And like I said, there's very little love lost when it comes to the policies of John McCain, which, let's be clear, are responsible for the deaths of millions. So I certainly am not saying that he should not be held to account for what his policies have created. But I don't see, I don't agree with mocking his daughter, who was not responsible for any of that and who was mourning her father after he passed away. I don't know why that was done, and I could not disagree more with that.
Yeah, and one of the follow-up tweets, they said, if we don't dance on the grave of war criminals, who will? Last time I saw you, Spike, you were at a convention, a libertarian convention in Washington State, and one of the things that you were talking about is their messaging, trying to communicate better with us normies and, focus on the idea of libertarianism and the liberty movement. I guess, what would you say to the folks at the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire? Are you planning to reach out to them? Are you planning to tell them to take the tweet down or to apologize?
I have, as a general rule, I stay out of stuff that is not my state affiliate, largely because I don't like to get involved in the day-to-day affairs of 50 state and hundreds of local affiliates. I will say this: I think it was a very, very bad tweet to make. I don't see any value in it. I think that it was a heartless move against someone who, if we're talking about, we're a party of holding people responsible for their actions and not punishing people for the actions of others. Meghan McCain had nothing to do with John McCain's policies. She was a baby when a lot of the worst stuff was even being done. And even when she was older, she wasn't, a decision maker in that. And I don't know what the purpose was of even going after her for that. You mentioned where I was talking to you about messaging to normies. This would be sort of prototypical of how not to do that. There are so many ways to bring up the policies of John McCain and other neoconservatives and pro-interventionist military types that do not involve basically making them sympathetic characters by mocking their children at a time of mourning their loss of their father at their funeral. There was no reason for that. In terms of reaching out to people and telling them to take things down, as a general rule, I don't do that. I will say I do hope they take it down, and I don't. I also want to address the thing about without. If we don't dance on the graves of war criminals, then who will? Putting aside the fact that this seems to be dancing on the children of this particular person and not them themselves, what is the point of this message? Like, is anyone going to look at this and say, wow, I was on the fence about whether or not military interventionism was a good thing, but now that I'm seeing, Meghan McCain crying at her dad's funeral, you know what? I'm now on the side of being against military interventionism. If anything, some people who are on the fence might think twice of it, just wondering why someone would go there with that. So no, I could not disagree more with it.
All right. Well, I appreciate that honest and direct answer, Spike. And I always enjoy talking to you and your unique perspective on things. So we'll definitely have you back on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brandi.
So thanks again to Spike Cohen for joining us on Fridays with Friends. Always good to hear a different perspective, especially on issues that have been around for a very, very long time and that the major two political parties have failed to address. It is Friday. Every Friday on the show, we check in on what's happening in the state of Florida, a state very, very different from Washington. It's our segment, Florida Report.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
Hello to our Florida-based correspondent, my sister Miranda. How are you?
I'm doing great on this Friday. How are you?
So well. We're so professional with each other.
I know.
Before we dive into a couple stories this week, I wanted to have you react to something we played on the podcast on Wednesday. So Florida, you guys had your primary election on Tuesday. Did you vote?
I did. Yes, I did.
Okay. You don't have to say who you voted for. But so in November, Charlie Crist is the Democrat. He actually used to be a Republican, but Charlie Crist is the Democrat who's going to be moving forward to face Ron DeSantis. And I played a clip on Wednesday that I said on the show, I think disqualifies him from serving in any public office. Here's that clip.
Those who support the governor should stay with him and vote for him. And I don't want your vote. If you have that hate in your heart, keep it there.
As a Florida voter, how does that come off to you?
It's just a voter in general. It is an extremely disheartening take on putting yourself out to people that you want to support you, because like you said on Wednesday, we are his constituents, whether we're Democrat or Republican or Libertarian. Like, no matter what, if you're the governor, no matter what house or what party you belong to, you still have to take care of all of us, and you still have to pay attention to all of our needs. And it was such a turnoff just to hear him talk so distastefully towards people that he should be actually trying to do the opposite to. If you, even as an underdog, if you think you're going to lose, you're supposed to lay it on even thicker in the nice sense, not just go straight to the, all right, I don't even want your vote. I don't know. I was actually a little speechless about it, because I remember he was a governor when I moved to Florida. And that was a whole different time in this world. It was a little more peacefully politically, as far as I remember, although I was younger and a little bit more disconnected from the conversation. But that was not the wave to ride, in my opinion.
It's I'm sure there are a lot of politicians who think that, who don't like voters of the other party, but you don't say it out loud. And it just comes across as incredibly divisive, which is the last thing we need right now. And yeah, if I were a voter in Florida, I'd be instantly not voting for you.
Yeah, instantly. Even if I was a big supporter of him, it would still leave a bad taste in my mouth, because it just doesn't play right into his character. It doesn't give me any hope for what kind of a politician he would be.
So his opponent, speaking of his opponent, Ron DeSantis, we can't get through a Florida report without talking about good old Ron. So he had been kind of threatening on the campaign trail that he was going to bus immigrants that came to Florida to Joe Biden's home state of Delaware. Of course, we know Texas officials, for instance, have been busing migrants to places like New York and D.C. Well, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis hasn't been, in fact, busing migrants or immigrants to Delaware. Why? Why has he not made good on that threat?
He hasn't made good on that threat because Biden stopped sending them here. The Political reports DeSantis, Florida not busing immigrants because Biden stopped sending them. Governor Ron DeSantis' administration has not yet started busing undocumented immigrants from Florida to other parts of the country, in part, he says, because the Biden administration has stopped sending them, which possibly was part of his plan. in the whole time.
That's genius. Like, we don't want like influx of immigrants here. And so we're going to send them to Delaware. So maybe Biden's like, okay, let's not send them to Florida then.
Yeah. But, I actually have a huge problem with this, both a problem with the way DeSantis is on this topic and the way Biden responds to this topic, because we shouldn't be using these people as any sort of political ploy. And that really is just such an inhumane thing to do, is to turn them into a problem when they're coming here because they're trying to escape problems. You know what I mean? So I granted there's a huge issue with immigration and undocumented people coming across our borders that we got to deal with, but using them as some sort of something to throw around at each other during an argument in politics is so not American, and so honestly really embarrassing for it to even be like a topic of conversation like this. That's just how I feel about that.
I 100% agree that they're being used as political pawns. I believe that we need to stop that many people from coming across the border to begin with, but it's similar to what they did and continue to do to Dreamers, who, were brought here through no fault of their own, and both parties have used them as political leverage to try to get things that they want. And you're right, it's just so wrong on a human level to just be busing these people to a certain location based off of the politics of the governor that lives or that controls it, or the mayor. So I agree with you. It's a little ridiculous.
Yeah, but I also, and I will add, just to close this conversation, I do think that, if this is part of an American thing, whether it's an issue or a beautiful thing that we offer to immigrants, all states need to bear the weight of that and take in immigrants, whether they're undocumented or they're coming in legally. I think every state has to pull their weight in that topic. Like, it shouldn't just be like, oh, we're going to send them here, we're going to stop sending them to Florida. I think that everybody needs to have a play, in this conversation and do that.
I agree with that to a certain extent. I mean, I don't think it's fair what's happening to border states as a result of the president's policies. I mean, you have these small towns in Texas that are being completely overrun. And so I don't fault them for being like, we're shipping these people elsewhere. I do think that there are some states that are more ready to handle an influx of immigrants, have more work for them, more labor for them. But yeah, I mean, it can't all rest on Texas and Arizona and small towns. This next story you have hits home because, as you know, I got engaged this week. And if my fiance did something like this, I mean, it goes without saying that we would be done. But there might be some bodily injury that also resulted. Okay, what do you got?
And like, this isn't a Florida man story, but let me tell you, when you visit Florida, it's in the air. It'll get into your system pretty quick. And the Miami Herald was telling us about a man on honeymoon leaves his sleeping wife and is arrested in a prostitution sting. A man was arrested on his honeymoon after Florida cops say he left his sleeping wife to meet with a sex worker who was actually an undercover police officer during, for this whole sting operation they've been putting out in an effort to kind of reduce the demand for, sex workers in Florida. And this guy was just, I don't know. It's so bad.
It's so bad. You get married, go to Florida on your honeymoon, and then you try to hook up with a hooker.
I really hope his wife is doing okay and she makes the right decisions for herself moving forward with this guy.
Yeah. All right, Miranda, we appreciate it.
No problem. I look forward to next week.
All right. And that has been this week's edition of Florida Report.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
We'll end our show, as we always do, with our segment Understanding America, where we read from a text or a speech or document from American history that helps us understand our wonderful country. I chose today to read from FDR's State of the Union address in 1941. Of course, we were in the middle of World War II, so it was a very critical time, not only for the country, but for the world. But part of his speech reflects something I had asked you guys on social media the other day. What do you want from the government? What is the core function that you want from government? And what FDR was doing in this portion of the speech, talking about the fact that we were in this war, in this conflict, and trying to bring it back to what really the nation was fighting for, and the kind of core foundations of our democracy that were at play in World War II. So again, this is an excerpt from Franklin Delano Roosevelt's State of the Union in 1941. The nation takes great satisfaction and much strength from the things which have been done to make its people conscious of their individual stake in the preservation of democratic life in America. Those things have toughened the fiber of our people, have renewed their faith and strengthened their devotion to the institutions we make ready to protect. Certainly, this is no time for any of us to stop thinking about the social and economic problems which are the root cause of the social revolution, which is today a supreme factor in the world. For there is nothing mysterious about the foundations of a healthy and strong democracy. The basic things expected by our people of their political and economic systems are simple. They are equality of opportunity for youth and for others, jobs for those who can work, security for those who need it, the ending of special privilege for the few, the preservation of civil liberties for all, the enjoyment of the fruits of scientific progress in a wider and constantly rising standard of living. These are the simple, basic things that must never be lost sight of in the turmoil and unbelievable complexity of our modern world. And I think a lot of that is still true today. Again, that an excerpt from Franklin Delano Roosevelt's State of the Union in 1941. And that does it for today's episode of Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. Watch out for those push-pulls, and we'll see you back here on Monday. If you have yet to become an Undivided subscriber, but you want to support our mission to give common sense a comeback, you can do that by becoming a subscriber on Patreon or Locals, patreon.com/undivided, or you can become a contributor on my Locals community, brandikruse.locals.com. Undivided is presented by our founding sponsor, 1530 Mortgage. Visit them at 1530mortgage.com.